Welcome, dear listener. Before we begin tonight's story, I'd like to invite you to let go just a little. Let your shoulders soften. Let your eyes grow heavy. Let your breath come slower. Now you are safe. You are warm. You are ready for a tale that glows like candlelight on old brass. Inhale gently through your nose and exhale slowly through your mouth. Let your mind rest beside you. Now, as if it too is curling beneath a woolen blanket, our story today begins in a quiet village nestled into the curve of a hill, where cobbled paths are mossy with age, and every window holds the warm promise of flickering light. Part 1. The Sound of Sleep. In the farthest corner of the village of Brindlewick, where the air always smells faintly of iron and time, there is a workshop that sings only after dusk. Its shutters stay closed during the bright hours, and its bell chimes are never heard. Before twilight, inside lives an old man. His name is Elric, the last bellmaker of his line. His fingers are curled with time, but steady as the wind on a still lake. Each night, when the first owl lifts from its perch, Elric lights a single beeswax candle and begins his work. Scratched into the wood by hands now long returned to the earth, and upon that bench rests a circle of bells, some smooth, some speckled, all quiet. He does not hammer any more, not at his age, but he polishes with cloth made from lamb's wool, soaked in lavender and vinegar, a practice passed down from his great-grandmother's father, who believed that metal had moods and needed soothing. You can imagine the scent: warm brass and soft vinegar, a whisper of dried flowers and old books. Elric hums a tune. No one else remembers something from a village wedding before the war. It is said that every bell holds a memory, and that some ring in different keys depending on who listens, but Elric listens with his fingers. He can feel when the bronze is ready to sing. There is one bell tonight sitting apart from the others, small enough to rest in a cupped hand, and it is nearly finished. Its crown is shaped like a sleeping tear, and its lip is carved with vines. If you looked closely, you might see a tiny lark hidden in the pattern, its wings folded gently in the metal's curve. Elric dips his cloth, makes slow circles left and right, with a rhythm that feels like rocking a cradle, and in the hush of the room you can almost hear the bell hum back long ago. Bellmakers believed that certain tones could mend sadness, one pitch for grief, another for restless dreams, another still to ease the heart after long silence. These tones were not chosen by chance. They were mapped by monks who listened to wind through pine and water trickling through hollow reeds. They called them tones of the spirit. Elric knew them by feel. He had tuned bells for morning, for new births, for fields blessed after drought, and once, many years ago, he tuned a bell for a queen's sleep. She had asked for dreams with no shadows. Tonight, this bell is for no one in particular, only for quiet, only for the hush that drapes across Brindlewick like a velvet shawl outside a hill is still, only the gentle stir of wind through time and the low hoot of an owl beyond the trees. Elric lifts the bell, its handle warmed from his hand, and strikes it softly against a padded mallet. The sound is not loud, not sharp. It is rounded and low like a note. Hummed through velvet, it shimmers through the room, settles into the corners, wraps itself around the candle's flame without disturbing it. This is the tone of ease, the tone that says everything is all right. Now, nothing needs to be fixed. You may sleep. He rings it once more, then rests it gently on a cushion of wool, and begins to tidy the space dust brushed from the tool scraps of cloth folded with care. The candle wavers as if breathing, too. You can feel the quiet now, not just hear it, but feel it wrap around your shoulders, soft as old cotton, safe as a lullaby. Tomorrow night there will be another bell, but for tonight only. This one sings, and it sings. Just for you. Now, let your eyes fall heavier. Let the scent of brass and lavender drift farther into your dreams. Let the bell's final tone ring in your chest, a heartbeat slowing, a breath deepening. The Bellmaker sets his tools aside and with a soft sigh leans back in his chair as the candle flickers low and the hills rest easy under the stars. Sleep follows sound, and sound has led you home. As you settle in a little deeper, maybe the pillow beneath your head feels softer now, or your breathing has grown slower without even noticing. Let the gentle hum from part one still linger like the soft resonance of a bell that refuses to quickly. Now we return to the candlelit room, to the gentle hands of Elric, and to the quiet hill where time moves like mist across glass. Part 2. The apprentice bell morning never enters. Elric's workshop, not really. The thick drapes are pulled tight to protect the sensitive chimes from loud light and careless heat. But above the workshop, where ivy climbs the chimney in lazy spirals, the sun creeps over the thatch and brushes the edges of his roof with a golden yawn. Elric is already awake. He doesn't sleep for long anymore. Just short rests that leave him floating, not tired, not alert, just somewhere in between. He sips warm water, steeped with dried rosehip and thyme, and waits for the moment the light feels calm enough to let in. Then, with a careful hand, he pulls back one curtain, just one. It lights the corner of the room, where a tiny shelf sits dusty but filled with history. Upon that shelf rests a small brass bell, untouched for many seasons, its handle worn smooth with use. This is no ordinary bell. It is the first one Elric ever made. His apprentice bell, he had been 14, and his master had told him that every bellmaker must forge one tone that sings only to them. It had taken him weeks, a bell made of bronze, mixed with tin, scavenged from a broken lantern, and copper melted from a coin once left in the chapel basin. He had stirred the metals by hand, poured the glowing mixture into a sand mold carved with trembling lines, and whispered to it as it cooled. He had been taught, as many old craftsmen were, that voice shapes memory and metal listens. When he had struck that bell for the first time, the note it gave was not perfect, not refined, but it had shimmered just slightly too. Long as if echoing something only he could hear, he named it Sora, after a star that no longer appeared in the northern sky. Tonight, he would polish Sora again for the first time in many years, because he had dreamt of it the night before, in the dream. He stood by the great cathedral's gate, and Sora was ringing in the distance, calling him toward something not fearful, but curious. Elric believed in dreams, not the kind found in books, but the kind that come folded in sound. He reached for the bell, and even the dust felt gentle under his fingers. He began the slow process, not cues, just movement with intention, wiping the surface with his lamb's wool cloth. He moved in spirals, pausing to breathe, pausing to hum. Outside the village remained quiet, still early, still slow somewhere. A rooster crowed, but softly, as if it too respected the silence of the bellmaker's hour. The bell began to shine again, not too bright, just enough to catch the light of a single candle wick. Elric struck it lightly, and there again, that tone, low, golden, like the sound you might hear in a dream. Right before waking, he closed his eyes and felt it pass through his chest, a quiet vibration, an old friend knocking once more. This tone, he thought, was not meant for churches or town halls. It was too personal, too tender. Perhaps he would use it for tonight's piece. He looked across the workbench and picked up a fresh mold, small, round, unmarked. He would not etch symbols into this one, not yet. He would let the tone decide what shape the bell would take. Some bellmakers worked in function, creating tolls to mark hours, or call meetings, or drive away fog. But Elric believed, as his master had, that bells were more than that. They were pockets of soul, echoes in metal. Sometimes they remembered things their makers had long forgotten. He set the mold down, lit a second candle, and took out his notebook in it. He wrote a single phrase, the tone that hums even when all else is quiet, that he thought would be the guiding thought for this new piece. Tonight's bell would not be for healing, nor grief, nor joy. it would be for stillness, for the breath. Between thoughts, for the comfort of having no need to speak. He traced the page with his fingertip, feeling the paper's gentle grain, then turned to prepare the metals. A pinch of bronze, a dusting of tin, and one thin shaving of copper from the rim of Sora. A gift from one tone to another outside. The wind shifted, a soft breeze, nudging through the crack beneath the door, bringing with it the scent of meadow grass. And last night's rain, Elric inhaled, slowly, and smiled. This bell would be a quiet one, the kind that needn't be heard to be felt. Let your body feel just a little heavier now, as if your limbs are wrapped in velvet and your thoughts have wandered into the candlelit hush. We'll return soon to see what Elric's new bell begins to become. But for now, close your eyes and hold the memory of that golden tone, just as he does. As you breathe softly now, perhaps you can imagine the smell of old parchment or the faint coppery scent of warmed metal in the still air. There's a breeze again, moving slowly through the hilltop village, through time-scented gardens, past shuttered windows, and finally curling around the old stone workshop, where our Bellmaker is preparing something new. Let yourself drift there gently now. Part 3. A bell without a name in the heart of Elric's workshop. The flame of a second candle burns low and steady. It makes no sound, but the glow it casts flickers on every brass curve and glass jar nearby, like golden breath resting on time-worn tools on the workbench. Just beside the lamb's wool cloth sits a small crucible, its old iron walled with tiny rivets that catch the candlelight. And for many years, it's been used to melt just enough metal to make something delicate. Tonight, Elric leans close to the crucible, watching the slow transformation as the tiny fragments of bronze and copper inside begin to shift from solid to shimmer. There is no rush. There never is. His hand hovers near, not to touch, but to feel the warmth radiating up and to listen. Yes, listen, because some bellmakers believe. As Elric's master once taught him, that molten metal whispers if you're still enough, and if you listen closely in the quiet between breaths, you may hear the metal speak of what it wants to become. Elric closes his eyes just for a moment. In the hush, he hears no words, but a suggestion, a shape forming not in his eyes, but in his chest. He opens them again, nods once, and reaches for the ladle. With smooth, practiced movements, he lifts the liquid metal, its glow soft and low, like a fire remembered in a dream. He pours it gently into the prepared mold, a small, open dome of blackened clay, and a tiny hiss escapes as the metal meets its new form. Not loud, just a sigh, as if the bell is exhaling for the first time. He sets the ladle aside, and leans back, watching the surface ripple. Once then settle, the mold will cool slowly over hours, maybe longer. And that's exactly as it should be. Across the bench, his notebook lies open, the page with the phrase still waiting, the tone that hums even when all else is quiet. He adds, no more, not yet. Instead, he stands, quietly moving over to the far side of the workshop, where an old wool shawl hangs on a hook beside the hearth. He pulls it over his shoulders and steps outside into the soft night air. The village of Brindlewick is bathed in moonlight, silver and blue shadows stretching long over cobblestones. Above, the stars blink gently, each one soft as a lullaby note. Elric walks just a few steps beyond his door and sits on the low stone bench beside the time patch. His hands are folded, his eyes are half closed. He is not thinking, he is not planning. He is simply being, because stillness is part of bell making, too. Many years ago, when he was still an apprentice, his master told him a rushed bell sings like a restless child. A slow bell rings with patience. Tonight, he waits with patience. From this bench, he can hear the rustle of wind through the hedgerows, the creak of an old weather vane turning slowly, and somewhere farther off, the gentle clink of someone setting down a cup in their kitchen. All these sounds quiet, unimportant to most, but to Elric, they are tones of life. They fill the silence without breaking it. Eventually, he stands again and returns to his workshop. The candle is lower now, its pool of wax nearly touching the holder's rim. The mold is still warm, but cooling. He won't open it until the following evening. That's part of the ritual. Every new bell must rest in its mold for one full moonrise to set its tone in silence. He marks the time in his notebook, then picks up Sora again, his first bell, and rings it one more time. Its tone is fuller somehow. Perhaps because he spent the evening remembering its story, or perhaps because the room is ready to hear it again. The sound lingers just long enough to settle back into the corners of the stone room, then fades. And so Elric prepares to sleep, not in a bed, but in the chair beside his bench where he has slept. Most nights, for years now, he wraps the wool shawl tighter around him, tilts his head back, and lets his breath slow. Outside, the moon begins to climb, casting silver lines across the shutters. Inside, the candle flickers once, then settles into a softer flame. And all through the night, the bell, without a name, cools in silence, waiting like a breath between dreams for its tone to be born. Let yourself sink just a little deeper now into the soft weight of your blanket, the rhythm of your breath, and the hush of quiet tones all around you. As you return now, let your mind feel even lighter, as if your thoughts have settled like feathers in a slow-moving breeze. The Bellmaker's world is waiting for you, quiet as ever, still warm from the firelight, still humming softly from within. Just take a slow breath and feel the hush settle around. Your shoulders, like a woolen shawl, spun from silence. Now our story continues, not with a clang or a toll, but with the silence between two heartbeats. Part 4. The visitor who carried silence. The bell cooled slowly through the night. As it always must, Elric had drifted off in his worn chair head, tilted to one side, with the last of the candlelight dancing across his weathered hands. And in the early gray of morning, before birds found their voice, there came a knock on the wooden door. Not loud, not urgent. Just 3 soft taps, spaced evenly like the rhythm of a calm breath. Elric stirred, opened one eye, and listened. He stood, slipped on his woolen slippers, and opened the door with a gentle creak. On the threshold stood a girl, no more than 10 winters old, with a cloak too big for her shoulders and a satchel. That hummed, yes, hummed, not with words, but with a tone subtle and low, like the sound of rain against wood. In the distance she looked up at him, eyes wide and unafraid. "My name is Lyra," she said softly. "My grandmother said you make bells that remember." Elric blinked slowly, then stepped aside. "Come in." He whispered, as if speaking too loud would disturb something sacred. Lyra entered her feet, barely making a sound on the stone floor. She walked over to the bench and stood before the mold. Though it was still untouched, still cooling, she didn't try to open it, didn't reach toward it. She just closed her eyes and listened. "There's a tone in there," she said, "a gentle one, like my mother's voice when she used to braid my hair." Elric's breath caught slightly. He hadn't told her anything about the bell or its purpose, or the feeling that had come to him as he poured the metal, yet here she was hearing it. He moved slowly to the shelf, retrieved a small wooden stool, and placed it beside the hearth. Lyra sat, and he poured her a cup of warm oat. Milk infused with clove and a touch of honey. They sat in silence for a long while, not awkward, not searching, just 2 souls wrapped in the same quiet. Eventually, Elric spoke. "Why did your grandmother send you?" Lyra sipped her drink, held the cup close to her chest, and whispered. She said, "I carry a tone that doesn't belong to me, and that you might help me return it." Elric's brows furrowed, but he said nothing at first. Instead, he stood, walked over to the bell shelf, and brought down a smaller chime bell. Its handle carved from birch, its body thin and pale. He handed it to Lyra. "Shake it gently," he said, "only once." She obeyed, and the bell gave a single note, pure but high-pitched, sharp, like the air on a mountain morning. Lyra winced. "That's not it," she said. "It feels wrong. Like a sneeze you can't finish." Elric chuckled, a rare sound, deep and low. "Good. That means your ears know the truth." He turned to the shelf again, this time choosing a larger bell with carvings of stars along the rim. Again he offered it to her. Lyra shook it. This time the sound was rounder, softer, but still it made her flinch slightly. Said, "That one's too full. Like it's pretending to be something it's not." Rick nodded slowly, thinking. Then he looked toward the mold. Still cooling, he walked over, knelt, and placed a single hand on the clay surface. Warm but steady. He looked back at Lyra. "Perhaps the bell that belongs to your tone isn't ready yet," he said. "Maybe it needs your presence to find its final shape." Lyra tilted her head. "You mean it's waiting for me?" "Yes," Elric replied softly. "Some bells are born with a purpose. Others wait for the right listener to arrive." Outside, the wind brushed against the shutters, carrying with it the sound of far-off church bells, faint and distant, but beautiful in their simplicity. Lyra looked toward the window. "They don't sound like yours," she said. Elric smiled. "No," he agreed. "They're meant to call the many. My bells call the few." He rose slowly, his knees stiff from years of kneeling, and moved to the small shelf by the door. He took down a thin strip of linen, soaked in lavender oil, and handed it to Lyra. "For your satchel," he said. "It hums softly. The tone it carries is old, and it will rest better with lavender." Lyra reached into the satchel carefully and revealed a tiny bell no larger than a plum wrapped in wool. Its tone was not struck, but felt. It hummed in a way that made the room feel smaller, safer. Elric's eyes widened just slightly. He recognized the markings on the rim. They were from a school of bellmakers lost over 100 years ago, who believed in weaving tone with memory. He leaned forward, hands gently folded, not to inspect, but to listen. "Where did you find this?" he asked. Lyra smiled softly. "It was buried under a stone tree near my grandmother's well." Elric exhaled slowly. "Then it has waited for you, too." And so, in that candlelit room, a bellmaker and a girl who carried silence sat together, not to fix, not to change, but simply to be, because sometimes the softest tones are those we do not ring, but recognize. Elric sat across from Lyra, the tiny ancient bell between them, its hum so faint you could almost mistake it for silence. But it wasn't. It was the memory of tone, a kind of echo of a note that hadn't been struck in 100 years. He reached out slowly, not to touch, but to feel the vibration near his fingers, soft and steady like the pulse of a lullaby. Lyra watched him carefully, her hands folded neatly on her lap, eyes filled with trust but also curiosity. "Does it have a name?" she asked. Elric didn't answer right away. He stood up, walked to an old cupboard in the corner, and opened it with a gentle creak. Inside were parchments, rolls, tied in twine, some stained with time, some faded to nearly dust. He pulled out one marked with a bell drawn in careful ink beneath it, a single name, Kalima. He brought it to the table, unrolled it slowly, and turned it so Lyra could see this. He said softly, "Was the last of the dream bells." She blinked, her voice no louder than a breath. "What's a dream bell?" Elric smiled. In the old days, when bellmakers weren't just smiths, but listeners of stars and keepers of memory, they believed some bells didn't just make sound. They held emotions, preserved them like amber holds air. He pointed to the drawn bell, nearly identical to the one before them. Kalima was one of those, forged with metal from a fallen star, tuned not with tools, but with silence. Lyra leaned closer, eyes wide. Why did they stop making them? Elric looked toward the fire, and his voice softened even more. Because people stopped listening, not with their ears, but with their hearts. The room fell quiet again, but it was a peaceful quiet, a warm quiet, like the pause before a bedtime story begins. Lyra took the little bell in her hands very gently, as if holding a sleeping bird. "It hums louder when I'm near," she said. "It never does that with anyone else." Elric nodded. "Because you carry its tone. You are its resonance. And it remembers you." She looked up, face lit softly by the hearth's glow. "But I've never seen it before. That doesn't mean it hasn't seen you." Elric whispered. He stood and walked over to the tuning table, laid out a small velvet cloth, and motioned for Lyra to bring the bell. With careful hands, she placed it on the cloth. He unfolded an old leather case. Inside were tiny tuning forks, each carved from a different wood: ash, birch, cedar, and yew. He tapped the first fork gently, a high, light tone, but the bell did not respond. Another, then he tapped one carved from moonwood, a silver-colored timber used long ago in ceremonial crafting. The bell shimmered, not with light, but with feeling. It pulsed, a slow wave, and the room seemed to lean in, as if the walls themselves were listening. Elric stepped back, placed both hands on the table, and took a slow breath. "It's awake now," he said, almost reverently. "It knows we're here." Lyra whispered, "What do we do with it?" He looked at her gently, his eyes softer than velvet. "We don't do anything, we listen." And so they sat there as the fire crackled low. the tone pulsing, ever so faintly, like a dream that hadn't quite faded. And outside, the sky began to blush as morning approached quietly, not with fanfare, but with a gentle sigh. Stay still, now. You followed a hum through time, felt its softness, its warmth, its wonder, and you are safe here in this quiet space where bells remember dreams and dreams remember you. You're doing beautifully. Elric placed the tuning fork down, its hum still echoing faintly through the room like a thread stretched between moments. Lyra sat motionless, hands folded neatly as if she knew something special was unfolding. The bell on the velvet cloth didn't move, but its tone lingered as though the air had absorbed it. Elric knelt slowly and opened a small drawer beneath the workbench. Inside were glass vials, no larger than a fingertip, each sealed with wax. He lifted one, carefully tilted it gently in the light, and the room caught the faint shimmer of golden liquid. He whispered as he worked, "This is bell water, gathered when the tone of a newly awakened bell vibrates into pure rain." Lyra tilted her head. "You can hear the rain in the bell." Elric smiled softly. "No, but you can feel it." He dipped a brush made from hare's tail into the vial and painted a single line around the rim of the bell. The glow was soft like sunlight through linen. Then he tapped the bell gently with the tip of a feather. And something beautiful happened. The tone rang out, soft, rich, and it didn't stop. It didn't echo. It unfolded, spreading across the room in slow ripples like the surface of a still pond. After one drop, Lyra closed her eyes, her shoulders lowered, her breath slowed. The tone entered her chest like a hush, like a lullaby that came from inside her own heartbeat. Elric didn't speak. He simply watched. Watched as the tone wrapped round her like a soft shawl woven from invisible thread. When the sound finally faded, it didn't disappear. It settled gently into the floor, into the air, into them. Lyra opened her eyes. "I saw something," she whispered, eyes bright with dreamlight. "A hill with purple trees and bells hanging from every branch." Elric nodded slowly, a tear catching at the corner of one eye. That was the grove of still wind, long lost to the world, but not to the tone. Lyra looked up at him. "You've seen it too." "Only once, many years ago, when I awoke the first bell in this shop. I thought it was a dream." She touched the bell lightly. "It's not a dream. It's a memory." They sat in silence again, but it was the kind of silence that healed, not the kind that hides after some time. Elric stood and gently placed the awakened bell into a velvet pouch. He handed it to Lyra. "It's yours, but not to keep to carry." Lyra looked confused. "To where?" To wherever the tone leads, she pressed the pouch to her chest, the hum now matching the rhythm of her breath. Elric turned to the fire, added a small log, and stirred the coals softly. Then he retrieved a narrow book from the shelf. The cover hand-stitched with silver thread, he opened it slowly, pages filled with symbols and old maps. Drawings of bells with names like Halden and Sorreo, each with a story beneath. He turned to a blank page, and with a quill made from a nightingale feather, he began to write Kalima, reawakened tone, deep memory bearer. Lyra of moss-reached date. Under the winter star, he closed the book and placed it back among the others. Lyra watched, then asked softly, "How many bells are there?" Ulrich looked toward the ceiling, his eyes distant. No one knows for sure. Some say 13. Others say as many as the stars. But the true number isn't how many were made. It's how many are remembered. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows along the stone walls. Elric draped a soft wool blanket over her, then sat at his bench, once more quietly polishing a bronze chime. He did not hum, did not speak, did not ring the bell. He simply worked. And in the silence, the tone remained, because sometimes healing doesn't come in a shout, but in a single note that reminds you who you are. And in the heart of Brindlewick, on a hill lined with mist, a bellmaker and a girl who remembered rested in the warmth of shared quiet. Now breathe in slowly and exhale even softer, settle deeper. Your mind is quiet. The tone hums faintly, still holding you. The next morning came soft and slow. Brindlewick lay beneath a fresh blanket of snow. Each rooftop capped in white, every branch outlined in delicate frost. A muffled hush filled the village, the kind of quiet that invites stillness inside the shop. Lyra stirred in the armchair blanket, slipping from her shoulder. The velvet pouch still cradled in her hands. The embers in the hearth glowed a soft orange, casting gentle warmth over the stone floor. Elric was already awake, as he always was, before dawn, tending to the coals, watching the sky for the first pale light. He didn't speak, but when he noticed Lyra's eyes flutter open, as if to say, "Yes, you're still in the story," Lyra sat up slowly, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Did I sleep here all night?" Elric's voice was barely above a whisper. "You did." And the bell dreamed beside you. She looked at the pouch, felt the soft vibration, still there, still gentle. What happens next? Rick paused, then motioned to a wooden chest beneath the bench. It was carved with tiny vines and lined with iron at the edges. He knelt, unlocked it with a brass key, and lifted the lid slowly. Inside, wrapped in soft linen, were maps. not maps of roads or rivers, but of sound. He unrolled one across the bench, and there drawn in ink, so fine it looked like breath, were hills, forests, and tiny symbols for bell towers and echo stones. He pointed to a spot deep in the northeast here. He said, where the snow never melts and the trees grow in a perfect circle. Lyra leaned over, tracing the path with her finger. It's far. Yes, Elric replied, but its tone has begun to fade, and it must be heard again before it forgets how to wring Lyra's breath. Caught slightly, do I go alone? No. He placed a small stone beside the map, etched with a mark shaped like a feather. You'll take this a tone, guide it listens more than it speaks, but it will hum if you're near another bell. She held it gently, the stone warmer than expected, its surface smooth but not lifeless. Then Elric handed her a pouch of dried herbs, a calming tea for when the road grows cold. And then his hand rested on the old book once more. He opened it, and on a fresh page he wrote in careful script, Frost, Bell, a waiting tone, stillness, seeker. He closed the book, his breath visible in the cold of the room. Outside, the snow glittered under the soft rise of sun, and in the quiet, even the air seemed to listen. Lyra packed her small bag. Nothing more than what she needed: the bell, the guidestone, the tea, a cloak stitched with silver thread. As she reached for the door, one more thing. He handed her a charm, a simple disc of bronze, etched with waves that spiraled inward. It's not magic, but it remembers warmth. Should you feel lost, hold it near your chest and listen. Lyra placed it inside her sleeve, close to her pulse, and nodded, thank you. The Bellmaker gave a small smile, the kind that speaks volumes in silence. Then Lyra stepped outside. The snow crunched softly beneath her boots. The morning light painted the frost in soft gold, and from the hilltop she could see the entire valley asleep under snow. As she walked, the stone hummed, faint but steady. The path ahead was quiet, but it was filled with tone, in wind, in snow, in memory. And far away, beneath a circle of evergreen trees, a bell waited, its voice hushed but listening. You're doing beautifully. Let this next breath slow you. Let it settle deep into your chest. The path is gentle, and the bell's hum is guiding you forward. The forest of circling pines, the snow-covered path wound slowly down the hill, lined with leafless birch trees, their white bark marked with tiny runes carved long ago, weathered by winter after winter. Lyra walked quietly, her breath soft and white, curling upward like morning mist. Each footstep made a gentle crunch, as though even the snow was mindful of silence. She paused now and then, placing her hand over the velvet pouch, feeling the subtle vibration of the bell within a calming pulse, like the slow rhythm of a resting heart. And the stone in her other pocket, the tone guide, began to grow, just slightly warmer, as if acknowledging the road ahead. The wind picked up in small whispers, carrying the scent of pine frost and something. The bare birches gave way to dense pines, dark green, tall and patient, their branches, thick with soft snow, arching gently over the path like a quiet cathedral of nature. The forest of circling pines was a place of gentle superstition. Even in the old maps, it was never drawn the same way twice, because the trees were said to shift when no one looked, slowly rearranging themselves until paths curved softly back to where they began. Some travelers claimed to hear a single note, always in the distance, always out of reach, like a bell ringing in a dream. You can't quite remember, but Lyra was not afraid. She had the tone guide and the warmth of Kalama's bell to remind her that sound, true sound, never gets lost, only patient. As she entered deeper into the forest, the light began to change, filtered through evergreen branches. When he had struck that bell for the first time, the note it gave was not perfect, not refined, but it had shimmered just slightly too, long as if echoing something only he could hear. He named it Sora, after a star that no longer appeared in the northern sky. Tonight, he would polish Sora again for the first time in many years, because he had dreamt of it the night before, in the dream. He stood by the great cathedral's gate, and Sora was ringing in the distance, calling him toward something not fearful but curious. Elric believed in dreams, not the kind found in books, but the kind that come folded in sound. He reached for the bell, and even the dust felt gentle under his fingers. He began the slow process, not cues, just movement with intention, wiping the surface with his lamb's wool cloth. He moved in spirals, pausing to breathe, pausing to hum. Outside the village remained quiet, still early, still slow somewhere. A rooster crowed, but softly, as if it too respected the silence of the Bellmaker's hour. The bell began to shine again, not too bright, just enough to catch the light of a single candle wick. Elric struck it lightly, and there again, that tone, low, golden, like the sound you might hear in a dream. Right before waking, he closed his eyes and felt it pass through his chest, a quiet vibration, an old friend knocking once more. This tone, he thought, was not meant for churches or town halls. It was too personal, too tender. Perhaps he would use it for tonight's piece. He looked across the workbench and picked up a fresh mold, small, round, unmarked. He would not etch symbols into this one, not yet. The tone stone in her pocket grew warm again, then warmer until it vibrated faintly against her skin. And Kalima rang, no chime, no clang, just a pulse, a whisper of memory, a tone meant not for the ears, but for the heart. The old forest bell, still and silent for so long, shuddered softly. Snow slipped from its rim, falling in quiet flurries. Then it rang low, deep, as if it had waited lifetimes to be heard. Again, the sound spread through the clearing, through the forest, through the sky above. The deer lifted their heads, the trees stilled, the snow paused in midair, and Lyra felt the sound settle into her chest. Like a warm ember, the bell didn't echo. It resonated, a song made of stillness that filled the spaces between things. When the tone faded, Lyra placed Kalima back in the pouch and sat beside the old bell, listening to the silence that followed. It was not the silence of emptiness, but of completion, of peace. She closed her eyes, let the snow fall softly onto her cloak, and drifted into a light sleep, the kind where dreams feel like memories and time. Feels like breath, the tone is still in the air. Can you feel it? Like a lullaby made from frost and bronze. Let it guide your next breath, slow and deep, soft and long. The echo's journey, Lyra awoke gently, not startled, but stirred, as if the earth had turned slightly beneath her. The snow was lighter now, falling in soft spirals from the branches above, glimmering in the filtered afternoon light. She stood, slowly brushing powder from her cloak, and looked at the bell. It sat in peaceful silence, but something had changed. Not its shape, nor its carvings, but its presence. It no longer felt forgotten, it felt seen. Lyra reached into her pouch, withdrew Kalima once more, and held it close to the old forest bell. For a second, nothing happened. Then a low note bloomed again, softer, this time like a whisper between friends. And with it came a tone from her guidestone, a new vibration, low and warm. It pulsed in 3 slow waves, like a signal or a direction. She closed her eyes, let the feeling pass through her, then turned toward the north, because tone is never still, it travels, seeks, resonates. Elric had told her some bells could speak. Across distance, not with words, but through vibration and memory. And now this forest bell had called to another. So she walked through the thinning snow, through winding pine paths, guided by that steady warmth in her pocket. The forest faded behind her, replaced by rolling hills, frosted heather, and sleeping meadows. The wind picked up, not sharp, but full of motion, as if it too were carrying the bell's song forward. She followed a river, its waters just thin streams. Beneath frozen surface, the sound of soft cracking ice underfoot. She crossed on a flat stone, pausing to listen to the wind, to the bell, to her breath. In the distance, a stone tower rose from a hillock, round moss-covered, and still atop it, a bell hung from a worn beam. Smaller than the forest one, but elegant, silvered with time, Lyra climbed the path. Toward it, the bell, not ringing, but waiting. Her tone, guide, vibrated, stronger, a quickening hum, like anticipation. When she reached the tower, she ran her hand along the stone wall, rough, damp, but humming. Inside, the spiral stairs were narrow, cold, but held a whisper of warmth from the bell above. She reached the top and stepped into the open platform there. The bell swayed gently in the wind, not ringing, just breathing. Lyra set Kalima down on the stone floor and took the charm. Elric had given her the bronze disc. She held it close to her heart and felt not sound but echo. It was as if the forest bell, the snow, the wind all lived inside. It now ready to speak again, and the silver bell responded. Its note was high, pure, a counterpoint to the forest tone. It rang once again, then paused. Lyra placed her hand over her heart and smiled. These were not just bells, they were memories across land, across time. She sat beside Kalima and opened her small leather journal, the one she always carried. And she wrote, "Silver bell, echo found tone, clarity, response, received." Then she closed the book, not with a snap, but a breath. She watched the sun begin to lower, turning the frost to liquid gold. It vibrated through the stone, through her boots, through her bones, not shaking, but soothing, and the wind carried that sound outward, onward, to wherever sound dares go. Now feel the hum linger just beneath your rib cage, a lullaby that doesn't need music. Let it guide your next inhale, slow and rich, and your exhale as calm as snowfall. We're nearly halfway through. The archive of sound after the silver bell had stilled and the sunlight had lowered into amber. Lyra descended the tower quietly. Kalima tucked into her satchel once more, the tone guide warm and pulsing with a rhythm that felt slower now, not a signal, but a reassurance. Down the winding path, through the frost-kissed meadows, Lyra walked toward the place the bell had suggested. Not in words, not in vision, but in tone. The next resonance, a place that had always listened, but had not spoken for many years. Elric had spoken of it once in a hush that almost disappeared under his breath. The archive of sound, a forgotten monastery built not to worship, but to record. Beneath its stone arches, monks once captured echoes, mapping the resonance of every known bell across kingdoms, from sea bells hung in lighthouse towers. 2 tiny travel chimes fastened to shepherds' belts. As Lyra neared its valley, she saw it rising from the ground, its windows broken. Ivy curling around its bell tower, like sleeping vines, the doors had long since rotted. But the threshold remained a line of carved stone. Each step etched with a note she passed through slowly, her boots, brushing leaves, crunching dry pine needles. Inside the air was cooler, but still, holding the weight of memory. Tapestries long faded hung like shadows on the walls, depicting rings and ripples, not of water, but of sound. She passed rows of shelves and old bell frames, wooden, brass, iron. Some were cracked, others polished, but none rang until she stepped into the center chamber. There, beneath a domed ceiling painted with constellations, lay a table of toned stones. Not just one, but dozens, each carved, each waiting her guide, pulsed. Again, drawing her toward a particular stone, dark gray, oval, cool to the touch. She placed her hand on it and felt a memory, not her own. An echo captured centuries ago of a bell lost at sea, and another from a mountain top so high its ring could only be heard in winter. Ere Lyra sat cross-legged Kalima beside her and opened her journal once more. She traced the outline of the gray stone and wrote archive, memory awakened, tone, legacy, echo, response. Returning then, she removed Kalima from its pouch and gently placed it on the table beside the archive stones. No need to ring it. It resonated all on its own. The other stones responded one by one, tiny vibrations, like a forgotten orchestra tuning again for the first time. The room filled not with sound, but with presence. Each stone was a voice, each vibration a note, and Lyra sat in the center of them, still and listening, letting them wash over her, through her, as if she were made of bell bronze herself. Above her, a beam of sunlight broke through the painted dome, illuminating the dust motes in slow dancing spirals. A tone emerged, not sharp, not loud, but round, full, like warmth wrapped in velvet. Lyra closed her eyes and breathed it in deep, long anchoring. For a moment time folded, and she was not just herself, but every bellkeeper, every listener, every soul who ever waited for a sound in silence. She opened her eyes slowly and whispered to the stones, "Thank you." The tones softened like a lullaby, fading into a dream, and the air settled again, quiet, but changed. Let yourself listen to the quiet behind your eyes, beneath your ribs. There's more to this journey. The scriptorium of silence. Lyra stayed in the archive long after the sun had slipped below the horizon, a pale indigo. Dusk pressed softly against the stained glass remnants of the arched windows. The stars, above barely visible through the dust-caked dome, seemed to shimmer in tune with the stones around her. But something in the far end of the chamber called to her now, not with sound, but with stillness. She stood calm and slow and moved toward a smaller corridor, lined with narrow alcoves, each marked with symbols once painted in gold. The last door on the left, half-hinged, tilted, slightly open. She entered a room untouched by footsteps for many years. This was the scriptorium of silence, a place where monks once transcribed tones not with words, but with inked lines and curved glyphs, recording how a bell's note felt, how it moved through the body, how it stirred sleep or healed sadness. The air in here was different, warmer, as if the vibrations of centuries had thickened it into. Something soft. Lyra walked to a desk covered in parchment rolls, a few cracked open, revealing loops and spirals drawn in shimmering ink. A thin sheet rested beside them, and on it a sketch of a bell, drawn hundreds of years ago, with symbols scrawled beside it, tone of renewal, forged in winter's deepest night, last heard in the north wind's mouth. Her fingers traced the lines slowly, and her guidestone pulsed again, a single hum, as if agreeing. She unrolled a second scroll and found diagrams of resonance. Not just sound, but feeling, mapped like whether some lines were jagged sharp, etched with notes like grief and stirring, others curved, gently marked lull, cradle, and fade. It was like reading a map of human emotion written in tones instead of words. And in the margin, a quote, faint but clear. When a bell rings softly enough, it wakes not the ear, but the soul. She smiled, her breath soft, warm, in the chilled air. Lyra sat down, lit a candle, and began to draw, not from memory, but from presence. She let Kalima hum, let her own heart beat, align with curve, spiral pause. She sketched not a bell, but its echo, its comfort, its silence. Around her, the room felt wrapped in velvet, and outside, the wind grew slower, as if the world itself were listening. When she looked up, the flame had danced lower, casting gold across the parchment. She closed her journal again and whispered, scriptorium. Tone translated, emotion, trust, echo, response, breath. With her satchel packed and Kalima wrapped safely again, Lyra stood from the desk and placed one of her sketches beneath the ancient scrolls, a quiet gift to the monks who once recorded echoes for a living. She stepped from the room and out into the archives center. The stones had quieted, but their warmth remained like the fading heat of a hearth long after the flame. She turned one last time, placed her palm on the threshold, and let out a deep, anchored breath. Then she walked on into the starlight. Now feel yourself exhale gently. Let that breath carry any tension you may still hold. Let your fingers soften your eyes, close a little more. The scriptorium has no rush, only quiet understanding. We can keep going. The inn of wind and wool. Lyra followed the winding road out of the valley beneath a sky brushed with moonlight and low-hung stars. Her steps were slow, each one deliberate, as if she were walking in rhythm with the breath of the world. The trail bent past a frozen stream, its surface lined with glimmering frost patterns, soft as lace, and up ahead a warm flicker glowed at the bend in the path. A sign hung gently in the wind, creaking once every few seconds, etched in old curling letters. The Inn of Wind and Wool. She smiled, familiar now with such names. Each, in this region, held a purpose, not just rest, but restoration, pushing open the carved wooden door. Fire crackled low in the hearth, casting golden light against woolen tapestries and shelves of dried herbs. The scent of chamomile, lavender, and rosemary drifted through the air, woven with the faintest note of burning pine. The innkeeper, elderly woman with hair like woven snow, offered a silent nod, as if she knew not to speak, but only to welcome. Lyra sat by the fire, slipping off her boots, letting her toes stretch toward the heat. Her satchel stayed close. Kalima, humming gently from within. Another guest sat nearby. A shepherd quietly spinning wool on a spindle. Each twist of the fiber made a soft hiss like whispered thoughts being turned into thread. Lyra leaned back, her head against a cushion stitched with constellations. Her eyes wandered to the mantel, where small bells hung from dried sprigs of rosemary. The innkeeper's voice came finally, soft and low. There are wind chimes, but for indoors, meant to sing to the soul when the body grows still. Lyra nodded and listened. One of the chimes swayed not from wind, but from warmth. A tiny bell, no larger than a thimble, sang a note so pure, so soft it felt like silk against the ears. The shepherd spoke, without looking up, crafted from hill bronze, where they say, storms go to sleep. Lyra closed her eyes, letting that image hold her. She imagined a storm, curling like a sleeping cat in the hills, its lightning tucked away, its thunder folded gently under cloud blankets, and in its silence the bronze was poured, cooled, and tuned by stillness. She reached into her satchel, carefully placing Kalima on the wooden table beside her. The innkeeper blinked slowly, recognizing the bell's shape, her fingers brushing her lips as if not daring to speak its name. It's been years since a traveler brought one of those here. Lyra gave a soft smile and simply said, she's guiding me by tone. The shepherd set his spindle down and offered her a pouch of dyed wool. Take this with you. It's been spun under full moon silence. They say it holds the sound of sleep. She accepted it and in return offered him a page from her sketchbook. A spiral drawn from the scriptorium, stitched with echoes. He nodded once, as if understanding its language completely. The fire burned lower, and the bells stopped swaying, but their warmth remained invisible. But certain Lyra was shown to a small room upstairs, its window cracked, just enough for fresh air, and the stars beyond seemed unusually close. She lay down, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of cedar, and placed Kalima beside her on the windowsill. The bell didn't ring, but it pulsed gently in time with her breath. As if breathing with her, she whispered into the room, into the night, into the hush. Let me remember this tone. Let me carry it forward. And sleep found her not sudden, but like wool being spun slowly over time, layer until the night was soft. Take a moment to feel that warmth in your own chest, that memory of wool, wind, and bells tuned to sleep. The Bellmaker's ledger, morning, came not with noise, but with light soft and buttery, spilling across Lyra's blanket like warm cream. She awoke with the faint hum of Kalima beside her, a breath of bell tone, barely there, but enough to remind her. She had not dreamed the journey downstairs. The inn was still the shepherd, gone, the fire no more than a memory in the hearth. The innkeeper placed a warm mug in her hands, spiced milk with honey, and gave a soft glance toward Lyra's satchel. You'll want to head east, where the old tower leans. No directions were needed beyond that. The land itself would guide her if she listened. Outside, the sky was the color of linen, a soft winter white clouds, slow and heavy, but kind. Lyra walked the trail again through low fields and stone paths until a tower appeared in the distance, crooked but tall, like a listening ear tilting toward the hills. It was made of river, rock moss grown thick between each stone, and at its base a wooden door painted deep green. She knocked once, then again, not expecting an answer. But the door creaked open, and the scent of brass wood, oil, and baked apples reached her. Inside was a workshop, spacious, but simple shelves of bell molds, piles of tuning forks, a hearth where a kettle simmered. And at the far bench, an elderly man, his hands thick with work, but gentle in motion. He was polishing a bell, not large, but shaped like a tulip. Its mouth flared with elegance. He looked up, his eyes crinkling in quiet joy. Well now, I thought I heard her tone. Kalima, she hasn't sung in decades. Lyra stepped inside, removing her hood, letting the Bellmaker take in the familiar artifact. He stood and placed his bell down, then reached for an old leather-bound book. It opened with the softest cracked pages, thick and yellowed, lined with names. He turned the pages slowly until he found what he was looking for. Kalima, forged in solstice year 642, tuned by a frostfire method, carried by the quiet order used to ease transition between dream and waking. He tapped the page and looked up. She was made for dreamers like you. Lyra felt the room pulse, gently, as if the words had a tone of their own, a resonance that matched something buried in her. The Bellmaker moved to a smaller drawer, pulling out a tuning fork carved of bone, and struck it gently on the table. The note it made was delicate, soft, like dew touching skin. Kalima echoed, in response, a gentle, harmonic wave. He smiled. There, it is perfect memory. He turned the book toward her, inviting her to write. She picked up the quill, and beneath the last entry, she added her name, Lyra. Keeper of Kalima, Journey of Tones. Chapter 1, complete. The Bellmaker poured them tea, and they sat by the hearth, drinking slowly, speaking rarely. He showed her other bells, ones still tuning, others waiting for voice, and one made from river glass, meant only to be rung in moonlight. Lyra felt a quiet peace settle over her, not final, but reassuring, as if the path ahead would reveal itself. Note by note, she stood after an hour, wrapping Kalima once more, and turned to the old man. Will you keep tuning? He nodded, his voice like soft wind through reeds. As long as I breathe, there are tones still unheard. She stepped outside again, into a morning that had barely moved, as if time had paused for their exchange. And on the horizon, a gentle hill, and beyond it, a village known only in whispers. She would go there next, guided not by map, but by resonance. Her journey was not finished. My ass, you listen to the hush between words. Let your own rhythm slow. Let your own rhythm slow. Let your thoughts unfurl like parchment. The grove of resting chimes, the path eastward wound through fields, now golden, where tall grasses whispered secrets with each breeze. Lyra walked in silence. Kalima nestled in her satchel, the side weight of memory warm against her side. There were no signposts here, no carved stones or lanterns, only the hush of wind through dry wheat and the hush of earth itself. Listening by late afternoon, she reached the grove. It was a circle of slender trees, their trunks pale as bone, their leaves thin and silvery, shimmering in the wind like quiet bells. Each tree held a single chime, small and delicate, hung from silk cords that swayed with grace. The sound they made was not constant, not even musical in the usual way, but soft-spaced, like a language of rest. Lyra stepped between them, feeling her boots sink gently into moss. The kind that stays warm even in dusk. The chimes rang gently as she passed each one, different, each one responding to something within her. One gave a note like morning light, another sounded like a dream, remembered, half faded, but still beautiful. She sat beneath the tallest tree, its roots curled like resting fingers, and closed her eyes. She breathed in and the scent of nightfall flowers reached her honeysuckle. Evening primrose and something older like distant smoke. Kalima pulsed once just a shimmer, a ripple. And then a voice spoke, not loud, not even outside her head, but a whisper within rest, here, just for a while. She did, and as she leaned against the tree, she felt her heartbeat slow, her shoulders loosen. The chimes continued to ring, but now they felt closer, not just around her, but within. Each note cleared a thought, each tone settled a memory. She remembered her first sketch, a spiral drawn in candlelight on the night. Her father first hummed her to sleep. She remembered rain tapping on stained glass, and how it felt like music with no beginning or end. And she remembered the first time she heard Kalima's voice, not in sound, but in silence. The grove had no hour, only mood, and mood had no measure. When she opened her eyes, the stars were just beginning to blink through the canopy, and the chimes had fallen quiet, as if satisfied. Lyra stood slowly, placing a hand against the bark, and whispered her thanks. She turned to leave, but paused at the edge of the grove. Hung on a low branch was a bell made not of metal, but of woven reeds. Dried and dyed deep violet, a note hung beside it, written in curling script for those who listen with their breath, not just their ears, a key. She took it gently, adding it to her satchel beside Kalima, where the two bells pulsed once in quiet harmony. Then she walked on into the deepening evening, toward a place known only by those who dream awake. The path of echoing stones, Lyra's feet pressed gently into the winding dirt road, moonlight laying silver patterns. Beneath each step, the air had shifted, cooled, not in warning, but in invitation. To her left, a stream murmured its voice like glass beads, tumbling softly to her right. The trees leaned in, not crowded. Just curious, she followed the sound of the bells, not outside, but the faint inner tones. Kalima's presence like a hum just beneath her ribs. The stars above glowed more brightly, now no longer scattered, but arranged as if a chart, a gentle guide. She passed an old archway, its stonework worn by weather and silence. Lichen glowed faint green in the corners, and as she stepped through it, the road beneath her feet changed. It became stone, not rough, but smoothed by time. Each step echoed softly like memory. This was the path of echoing stones, whispered of in her childhood books, a place where the thoughts you carried were heard by the earth itself. Lyra walked slower, each echo behind her, just a breath delayed until it became what reply when she whispered, "I'm listening." The stones replied with a warmth, a hum that vibrated upward through her boots into her knees, her spine, her breath. She paused and removed Kalima from her satchel, holding it in both hands. "I'm not sure where I go next," she whispered. And from somewhere unseen, a single bell rang. Not Kalima, not the reed bell, but a third. Its tone was low, deep, not frightening, just solid, anchoring. It rang once, and Lyra felt the air shift again. A glow appeared ahead, not flame, not moon, but something in between. She followed its soft step after soft step until the path opened ahead was a small round house, stone-walled with a thatched roof that looked like the back of a sleeping animal, light spilled from its windows. Soft amber, she approached, knocked once the door opened, and a woman stood there. Hair, silver eyes, darker than night, but kind. Without a word, she stepped aside, letting Lyra in. Inside was not a room, but a memory. Shelves filled with folded linens, each one embroidered with patterns Lyra recognized from stories. A kettle sang softly, and beside the hearth a loom, half-woven, a bell hanging from its frame, used to mark time between rows. The woman gestured to a cushion by the fire, then sat opposite, pulling thread through cloth with the gentlest rhythm. "You've brought the tone and the silence between tones," she said. Voice like distant thunder, softened by snow. Lyra nodded and placed both bells before her. The woman reached for the reed. Bell held it gently to her ear, closed her eyes. "This one is for sleep. Not the kind that comes from tiredness, but the kind that restores." She rang it once, and the sound was barely audible, but it wrapped the room like a blanket woven from lullabies. She returned the bell to Lyra and picked up Kalima. "This one," she said, "is for memory, but not the sharp kind. Not pain, just the soft pieces we lose too easily." Lyra watched the woman thread golden yarn through the loom and felt the knots in her shoulders soften. "Why are there bells?" she asked softly. The woman smiled. "Because some questions don't need answers, only space. Because we forget how to hear ourselves. And bells remind us they ask nothing. They only ring. And that's enough." Lyra rested there, beside the crackling fire, between fabric and tone, held not by walls, but by the stillness they offered outside the echoing stones, quieted even they had paused to listen. "You're still here, still drifting deeper. Let the warmth of the roundhouse hold you." The forgotten tone, the fire, crackled softly in the roundhouse shadows, playing gently along the woven walls. Lyra lay curled on the floor mat, Kalima nestled near her chest, the reed bell resting just above her head. The old woman's loom had gone still, its thread caught mid-twist, but the silence between sounds was the gentlest music of all. Outside, a soft breeze brushed against the doorframe, carrying with it the distant scent of lavender and damp wood. World feel wrapped in linen, a scent that made the whole. Lyra blinked slowly, not out of fear, not from thought, but from rest. The old woman spoke, though her lips barely moved, as though the air itself whispered her words. Do you know the tone that isn't heard? Lyra sat up slowly, her hands still cupped the warmth of the bell. No, she whispered. The woman smiled, and that smile held hundreds of winters and just as many dreams. There is a tone that only comes when two bells ring together, but only in harmony, only when the listener is ready and the air is still. She stood, and with her movements, the very shadows seemed to hush. From a small chest, she drew out a third bell. Glass clear, but tinged faintly with blue. She handed it to Lyra, who took it carefully, as if holding breath. This bell was unlike the others, lighter than it looked, and cool like moonlight in water. The woman gestured, and the two sat across from one another, a woven mat between them, a small candle flickering at its center. You must ring all three, the woman said, but not at once. Let them find each other like birds meeting mid-flight. Lyra nodded, closed her eyes, and listened inward first to her breath, to the warmth of the room, to the silence that wasn't empty. Then she rang Kalima. Its tone drifted through the air like memory's soft round, slightly metallic, like the far-off toll of a bell across fog. Next, she rang the reed bell. Its whisper joined Kalima's hum, not louder, but deeper, and somewhere in the space between her shoulders relaxed. And then the blue glass bell, its chime was impossibly soft, as if light had made a sound, and it slid perfectly into place between the other two. For a moment, nothing, and then a fourth tone emerged. A tone not from any bell, but from the meeting of them, from their harmony. It rose from the mat, like warmth curled around Lyra's wrists, her ears, her ribs. It wasn't loud, but it was deep and full, and as it rang, so too did the room begin to shimmer. Not brightly, but like memory returning, or a dream making itself known again. Lyra opened her eyes and saw not just the roundhouse, but 100 roundhouses. A village stretched in every direction, not in space, but in time. Mothers at looms, children chasing feather balls, elders humming by fires. She saw the bells hanging in every doorway, and she understood. They weren't tools, they were guardians, each tone a protection, a remembrance, a song kept safe. The woman placed her hand on Lyra's. You hear it now, she said. Lyra nodded. Tears had formed, but they didn't fall. They simply shimmered and cooled. Outside, the moon had climbed high, casting gentle patterns across the path of stones. Lyra stood, collected the 3 bells, wrapped each in cloth. I will carry them, she said. But more than that, I'll teach their music. The woman smiled once again. But now there were no words, only the sound of breath and the hush of knowing. Lyra stepped outside the breeze, greeted her warm, familiar, almost playful. And the path before her, though dark, seemed lit from within. She walked the bells quiet, but her steps now sounded different. Not louder, not heavier, but more whole. You are doing beautifully, resting in the rhythm of tones. And hush, would you like to keep going? The valley of still air. Lyra's steps carried her through a field of low mist, the silver hush of dawn barely touching the horizon. She had left the roundhouse far behind, but the memory of its warmth stayed tucked beside her like a second heartbeat. Each bell was wrapped in soft wool pressed close to her chest. But they didn't need to ring. Their silence sang gently on its own. She came now to a place she'd only ever heard of, a place called the Valley of Still Air. It was marked by 3 standing stones, tall and time-worn, each one carved with patterns that pulsed if you let your eyes blur just slightly. No birds flew overhead here, not for fear, but for reverence. The still air was sacred, not empty, but full of rest. She stepped between the stones, and immediately the sound around her changed. Her own breath was louder, her heartbeat slower. It was like walking through velvet. The grass was soft-dewed with starlight that hadn't yet melted, and the sky held that rich, early blue, the kind that makes you forget the sun even exists. Single willow tree, its branches curled downward, as if cradling the earth itself beneath it. A platform of smooth stone gathered from the river centuries ago. This was the listening ground. Every few generations, someone came to this place. Not to speak, but to hear. Lyra sat cross-legged on the stone, the 3 bells arranged before her like a triangle of memory. She did not ring them. She waited. The wind didn't blow. The leaves didn't stir. And in the stillness, Lyra noticed something, a rhythm, not sound, but movement. Her thoughts were slowing, no longer racing, not even walking. They were drifting like feathers, soft, unconcerned. And into that silence, a single question formed, not from her, but from the place itself. What do you carry that is not yours? It wasn't spoken aloud. It didn't need to be. The question rippled through her chest and settled low beneath her ribs. She let her breath come deeper and allowed herself to answer inwardly. Fear, perhaps not hers, but carried for others, expectations, old, woven by hands she barely remembered. She didn't resist, she simply acknowledged. And, as she did, one of the bells chimed. The blue glass, one soft, clear, like wind, moving through morning frost. It had not been touched, but it had heard. The tone lingered, and in its shimmering trail, Lyra felt lighter. She didn't speak, but tears welled again. Not sorrowful, just freeing. The bell stilled, and the valley held its breath. A second question floated in what do you keep forgetting to forgive? She didn't rush. There was no rush in this place. Wrapped in stillness, she let the thought unravel like a thread caught on bark. Moments she wished had gone differently, words she hadn't said or had said too quickly. Faces she hadn't seen again, the reed bell responded. This time, its sound barely there, like breath caught in fabric. It filled the air gently, and again the valley listened. Lyra's shoulders dropped, her spine eased. Forgiveness was not always loud. Sometimes it was just stillness, chosen on purpose. The final question did not come from the air, but from within. What do I need to remember? She reached for Kalima, held it to her chest, closed her eyes, and rang it. The tone that spilled out was fuller than she remembered, deeper, like the color of a night just before it folds into morning. And with it, memories returned, her mother's quiet laugh. The way the Bellmaker once wrapped tools in velvet, even though he worked alone. The sound of rain on copper roofs, not dramatic memories, but the ones that make you whole. The valley listened, and Lyra breathed. She placed the bells in a line, bowed her head, and whispered 2 words, "Thank you." The wind moved then for the first time, just enough to carry her gratitude away. The willow stirred its leaves like soft chimes, and the air, though still, felt less heavy, more like a blanket than a silence. Lyra rose slowly, carefully, as if standing up in a dream, not wanting to wake the ground beneath her. She stepped back through the stones, the mist parting gently, and the bells, though quiet, felt louder within her. She had not just carried them, she had listened to them, and they had answered. You are resting well, drifting in the hush of ancient tones and willow-sweet stillness. The library of hollow echoes when Lyra left the valley of still. Ere the sun was low behind the hills, casting golden slants of light across the moor. Her footsteps made no sound on the mossy path, and her thoughts wandered quietly, like they knew they no longer needed to rush. She was walking towards something she had heard about only in whispers, a place mentioned in the Bellmaker's notes once long ago. Called the Library of Hollow Echoes, it was said to sit where 3 rivers meet, and only those who arrived in silence could enter, those who carried noise of anger. Regret or haste would find only rocks and fog as twilight settled across the world. Lyra came upon the rivers, and sure enough, there they met in a still, glistening pool. Above it, on a rise of smooth stone, was the structure. It was not grand, not tall. It looked almost like it had grown from the land, a round dome of pale stone, etched with circles that overlapped like the ripples of a bell's ring. The door stood open, though there was no handle, just a low hum in the air. Lyra passed through it, the bells in her satchel resting against her side. Quiet still, inside the world, dimmed to candlelight, hundreds of them in lanterns in alcoves, floating as if suspended in breath itself. The walls were lined with scrolls, leather-bound tomes, and strange tools. But what Lyra noticed most was the sound. There was a constant, soft echo, not loud, not distracting, but layered, as if every word ever spoken here had decided to linger. She moved through the chamber, her fingers brushing. A hanging chime which didn't ring, but did cause the air to shift like silk folding in water. She came upon a table, round, carved with symbols of bells, moons, and sleeping eyes. And there in the center lay a single sheet of vellum, on it a drawing of a bell. Not one she carried, not one she had seen. This bell was translucent shaped, more like a droplet, and surrounded by stars. Underneath it, 3 words were written in careful ink, tone of remembering. As she traced the shape, the air behind her shifted. A figure had arrived, old but not frail, dressed in robes that seemed stitched from dusk itself. The figure bowed slightly and spoke without raising their voice. "You have heard many bells." Lyra nodded. The figure stepped closer, and with them came the scent of paper. "Cedar and thyme, there is one more to hear, but it cannot be rung, it must be recalled." Lyra furrowed, her brow recalled. She whispered, "Yes." The figure said, "It is a bell of memory, not of sound. A tone that arises only when what has been forgotten wishes to return." The figure gestured to the table, and Lyra laid her hand again. She closed her eyes and breathed, not deeply, just enough to feel the present moment settle. She thought of her village, of the Bellmaker's hands, of the first time she'd heard Kalima, of the silence in the roundhouse. The way the old woman hummed with no tune. She thought of what had been lost, her mother's lullabies. Her father's quiet way of fixing tools without complaint. The way the air once smelled when spring finally won over winter. And then, from somewhere between her ribs and her throat, a vibration began. Not outside, but within it was a hum at first, then a ring, then a tone so sweet, so ancient, it made her knees soften. The room heard it, the library responded. Scrolls trembled gently on their shelves, and the candlelight grew rounder, warmer. The figure smiled and said nothing. The tone filled the space, and Lyra's heart felt weightless. She remembered everything, not as images, but as knowing. Like a song, you suddenly recall all the words, too, though you haven't heard it in years. She opened her eyes. the vellum now showed more than a drawing. It shimmered with light, and the ink seemed wet once more. The bell had changed shape, slightly more like the one she carried. Yet not quite. The figure spoke again. "You have summoned the tone. Now you may share it." Lyra nodded. She rolled the vellum, gently tied it with a silver thread offered by the figure. And with her bells and her breath and the memory now resting inside her, she left the library of hollow. Echoes outside night had fully arrived. The stars above sparkled not just with light, but with recognition. She walked slowly, softly, back toward the world that waited, but with her came something ancient and kind and whole. The tones are settling around you now, soft, patient, woven with memory and breath. The tuning of the sky bell when Lyra returned to the roundhouse. The stars were bright and low, like old friends leaning in to listen. She had carried back the vellum scroll, the memory tone, and the deep quiet from the valley, and the library woven into her steps, into her breath. The roundhouse welcomed her, as before its stone walls whispering in their sleep. The hearth now lit with a gentle fire that needed no tending. As she stepped inside, a hush fell across the bells hanging on their beams, not from silence, but from attention, they knew. She laid Kalima down on the wooden table, the others resting beside it, and then unrolled the vellum carefully. Its silver thread slipped free like moonlight sliding from water. The image on the vellum shimmered slightly, as if it remembered being drawn, as if the ink itself breathed Lyra, whispered to the hearth, and it flared once, then settled, casting long, calm shadows across the table. She picked up her tuning wand, a slim rod of glass and reed used to gently coax sound from even the shyest bell. And now, with the scroll beside her, she began to work. The process was not one of hammering or polishing or shaping. It was one of listening each bell she had collected. Blue glass reedwood, stone-pressed copper. They were not meant to sound alone anymore. They were to become one. The copper to the west, and in the center, Kalima. The air thickened slightly, but not with weight, rather with anticipation, as if the roundhouse itself was leaning in with steady hands. Lyra traced the edge of Kalima and sang a tone, not with her voice, but with the breath of memory she had brought back, and Kalima responded. Its sound rose slowly like steam from a hidden spring, not high, not loud, but full. It spread gently to the other bells, and they began to hum in harmony. Each bell resonated with a note of the memory. But none of them alone told the whole story. Only together could the sky bell be tuned. That was what the scroll had meant. A bell not made from metal, but from memory. Lyra closed her eyes Let her shoulders fall open, her jaw soften, her breath deepen. She let the tones guide, her fingers placing small threads of silver leaf between the bells. So, they shimmered like starlight captured in silk. She whispered names to each one, not names of people, but of moments. First laugh for the reed, bell silent, forgiveness for the copper, unseen kindness for the glass, ancient love for Kalima. The bells accepted the names not as labels, but as echoes that shaped their sound. And as she placed the final thread, a tone rang out, clear, long, like time itself, holding its breath. The sky bell had awakened. It did not swing or chime, but the room filled with something larger than sound. A warmth in the chest, a tingle in the fingertips, a softening behind the eyes, as if every breath you'd ever forgotten to take had just returned to you. The bellmaker's note had been right. A bell was not just a tool, it was a remembering, a way to hold stillness and offer it to the world. Lyra sat back, tears on her cheeks, though she hadn't felt them fall. Not sad, not even happy, just present. She looked back, not with eyes, but with knowing. The sky bell was not hers to keep. It was meant to be heard by those who forgot how to pause, by those whose sleep had become restless, by those who needed to be held without touch. Tomorrow she would carry it to the hills, to where the wind was always listening, and she would ring it once, just once, to send the memory out into the world like a lullaby, not for recognition, not for praise, but because the world needed more gentleness, and she had remembered how to give it. You are resting now, wrapped in tones as old as love itself, soft as silver, gentle as willow breath. The bell's final gift, dawn, came slowly like honey poured over hills, soft and golden without urgency. Lyra stood on the crest of a hill, wrapped in her cloak, the sky bell nestled in her arms, woven gently into a cradle of reed and wool. Below her, the valley stretched out, not silent, but listening. The world was waiting, not for a performance, but for a reminder of what it means to pause, to breathe, to remember the small, sacred things. She turned eastward toward the rising sun. The wind curled around her ankles, then up past her shoulders, gentle, cool, curious. She held the sky bell up, just high enough for the light to kiss its edge. Not with force, not with flourish, but with the reverence of someone placing a hand on an old friend's shoulder. The sound rose slowly, not just into the air, but into the soil, the trees, the water. It wasn't a chime, it wasn't even a note. It was a tone, deep, round, perfectly still, in motion. Birds, quieted grass, bent slightly, as if bowing, and the clouds seemed to slow their drifting. Far below, in the village, a child paused, mid-step, looking toward the hill's eyes wide, heart strangely light. An old woman on her porch leaned back, eyes closed, as though remembering something from long ago that she didn't know she missed. Even the stones, those ancient watchers of time, felt it. Lyra held the tone as long as it asked to be held, and then she let it go. The wind caught the last of it, carrying it across ridges, through pine, over rivers, and into places forgotten by maps. The sky bell quieted, but did not dim. It was not meant to ring again today. Its gift had been given. Lyra sat down on the grass, damp with morning dew, and felt no urgency to move. She watched the clouds, the light dancing his roundhouse, his patient hands, his soft humming as he worked. She knew now that his craft had never really been about making sound. It had been about stillness, the kind that hums just beneath the skin, the kind that returns when you finally let go of what was never yours to hold. As the day warmed, villagers began to climb the hill. Not in a crowd, not in ceremony, but one by one. Each person brought something small, a note, a flower, a quiet thought tucked into a pouch. And, without words, they left them in a circle around the sky bell. Not because they understood it, but because they felt it. The story was theirs. Now, the Bellmaker's tones, Lyra's journey, the memory of the library, the whisper of silver thread. It would all settle not into legend, but into rhythm. The rhythm of morning bread, rising of boots, brushing dew, of lullabies sung near shutters. And in that rhythm, the bell would ring again and again, quietly, without sound, just felt by those who needed rest, by those who had forgotten how to sleep, by those who craved a kindness without reason. Lyra smiled, her eyes filled with sky, and somewhere deep in the stillness she heard Kalima hum once more, not loudly, just enough to say, "You've done well now. Rest, the world will remember the tone, because it was a way home now." Dear listener, you may let go of the story. Your breath is soft, your thoughts gentle. The bells have rung for you tonight. May you drift into dreams as deep as river stones, as warm as a hearth, as quiet as a bell that only sings in memory. Sleep well, and thank you for listening. Good night.